Childhood is when the brain grows fastest, because that is when the ability to speak and read, some of the greatest blessings bestowed on human beings by Allah, will develop and start to be used. During this period, the brain wishes to record everything perceived by way of the sensory organs. That is why there are twice as many neuron networks in a child's brain compared to that of the adult brain. Learning takes place by neuron network recognizing one another. A child's regular development is directly correlated to the extent to which the networks recognize one another. For example, it first crawls, then walks, and then begins to run. The child also acquires a series of social and mental skills during this time, such as making friends, concentrating on one point and remembering events. But no learning process during these years is as complex and miraculous as speech. How does a child begin to speak? Could this function managed by the brain have emerged as the result of a series of random events? All the evidence shows that the answer is no. The brain is the work of a flawless creation. Allah reminds us of this sublime creation in a verse. I seek refuge in Allah from the accursed Satan. Allah brought you out of your mother's wombs, knowing nothing at all, and gave you hearing, sight, and hearts, so that perhaps you would show thanks. The ability to speak is managed by neurons in the left hemisphere of the brain. The fundamental order that makes speech possible appears in the brain from the moment of birth. However, the baby begins to speak at the end of a specific process of development because, as in the example of computer networks, the brain has to accumulate and record the necessary number and type of data. There is an unbreakable bond between memory and speech. You cannot speak without memory. Brain records information in the memory by two different processes: long and short-term memory. Long-term memory begins to develop at about the age of 2. Since the development of speech is directly related to the development of memory, the child also begins speaking in the proper sense at the age of 2. Contrary to popular opinion, the brain does not record everything among its folds and store it for use until the end of life. A great deal of information that is not considered significant, not used or not repeated is erased after storage for a certain length of time in the short-term memory. All the information from the senses is collected in the region of the brain known as the hippocampus. If no significance can be attached to a piece of data in the light of previous experience, then it is erased after remaining in the region for a while. For example, we hear a conversation in a language that we do not understand and cannot attach significance to, and since the conversation is of no use to us, it does not remain in our memories for long. Some information is needed for a limited time and stored in the memory for so long as it is used. This may be a minute, or an hour, or a day, or 3 years. Such information may include a mathematical formula learned for a test, or a computer password. All this kind of information is kept in short-term memory and erased when no longer needed. Long-term memory contains information sent from the hippocampus to the cortex. Every new record in the cortex sets millions of neurons that completely surround the cortex into action. In this way, the hippocampus establishes harmony between new and old information, new information is recorded in lower levels of tissue, to the extent that it is compatible with previous experience. The recording process does not take place as a whole. The brain first breaks down an image or piece of information to be recorded into basic parts, because each part will be stored in the relevant part of the cortex. An apple, for example, its shape, color, taste, and smell are filed away in different regions of the brain. When required, or when a single feature belonging to that apple is encountered, the concept of the apple as a whole and all the details within that concept are recalled from memory. We call this remembering. This process of remembering generally takes place so fast that we are unaware that we are remembering anything. Sometimes, as when we try to remember the name of a film we watched 10 years ago, we may have to think for a whole day, and sometimes remember things hours later. Today, we're able to watch the brain as it works with the help of advanced imaging techniques, and we thus know which parts of the cortex are responsible for which jobs. This region, for example, analyzes images from the eye. This part regulates data signals from the sense of touch. This area right next to it manages muscle movements. Speech is regulated solely in these 2 points on the left of the brain. Over the last 10 years, only these limited area of operation of the cortex layer have been illuminated. This large remaining area still contains a great many mysteries. Another complex phenomenon of the childhood period is the development of the ability to read. In order for reading to take place, several very different regions of the brain have to work together simultaneously. The first stage of the reading process involves the eye and the function that is seeing. We make use of 30 different points in the brain just to be able to see. These regions interpret color, movement, shape, distance, and depth. In reading, we make use of all these subsystems. We perceive the letters one by one and interpret groups of them as words. And then we understand the sentence made up by the combination of all these words. The brain arranges what is read, forms a theme, and then produces a new composition by making use of millions of previous records, which may be with or without images. All these systems become active at the same time, outside our consciousness, and an interruption to just one of these systems will make it impossible to make out a single letter. In short, it is with the help of this glorious system bestowed by Allah that a person is able to read a single word. A person who knows this will read every word in knowledge with the awareness of what Allah reveals in the Quran. I seek refuge in Allah from the accursed Satan. Recite in the name of your Lord, who created man from clots of blood. Recite, and your Lord is the most generous. Adolescence covers the years between 12 and 20. The brain has now completed its physical growth and weighs some 1,400 grams. We can examine the structure of this mature brain under 3 sections: the right and left hemisphere, the brainstem, and the cortex. The brainstem is a bridge between the central nervous system and the brain. The stem is subdivided into several different regions. The tiny components that make up the stem are responsible for amazing functions. The cerebellum that lies here is responsible for balance and muscle movements. It is with the help of the cerebellum that we are able to stand on 2 feet and walk. Such a vitally important organ comprises just 10% of our brains. The medulla controls heartbeat and respiration. It is this tiny piece of the brain, which is ignorant of where the heart is and what it does, that determines how often it beats. The thalamus establishes communication and coordination between the brainstem and the cerebral hemispheres. The hypothalamus is responsible for such primary biological functions as controlling body temperature, blood pressure, weight, hunger, and thirst. It is a piece of flesh weighing just 4 grams and containing billions of cells that perform all these functions. But how is it that such tiny organs are able to establish bodily equilibrium and carry out all the functions that allow the body to work in such a flawless manner and at just about the right time? The answers to all these questions lie in the knowledge of Allah, who creates and flawlessly gives shape to all things. The left hemisphere of the brain controls the right side of the body, and the right hemisphere controls the left. The hemispheres are mirror images of one another, though there are significant functional differences between them. For example, the regions that regulate speech lie in the left hemisphere, and those regulating perceptions of space in the right. The internal parts of the hemispheres are responsible for many different functions. These include learning, memory, maintaining the body's core temperature, controlling the body's hormonal systems, and emotional reactions. The highest control point of the central nervous system is the folds that first come to mind when one thinks of the brain. This structure that resembles a crumpled up piece of paper is the cortex. The cortex is 1 millimeter thick and consists of gray cells. Laid out flat, this layer of the brain covers an area of 1.5 meters. It is this 1 millimeter thick layer that enables human beings to read, think, and plan ahead. One important point about the cortex is that it is unique to human beings. There is no such layer in the chimpanzees and other monkeys that Darwinists refer to as the supposed close relatives of man. All these layers of the brain are too perfect to be designed by any scientist and too complex to have come about by chance. Every detail in the brain has been specially created. Every rational person will see that such a flawless system is the work of a conscious creation. This is the incomparable creation of Almighty Allah, Lord of the earth, the sky, and everything between.